They sent a woman to face a monster as a joke, but when the gunfire erupted and the ranch burned to ash, she became the only thing standing between a dying man and his executioners. This is the story of how Red Hollow's cruelest prank transformed into their greatest legend, a tale of a woman whose strength they mocked, a rancher whose loneliness nearly destroyed him, and the night she rode through hellfire to prove that power has nothing to do with size. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The morning sun hadn't yet burned the frost off Red Hollow's streets when Preston Hale conceived his masterpiece of cruelty. He sat in the dusty Rose Saloon, boots propped on a table still sticky with last night's whiskey, watching through the window as Lila Harper carried 2 full water buckets across Main Street. Each bucket must have weighed 40 pounds, but she moved with the steady grace of someone accustomed to work, her broad shoulders set square beneath her worn cotton dress. "Look at her," Preston drawled, loud enough for the dozen men scattered throughout the saloon to hear. "Built like a draft horse. Wonder if she's got the temperament to match." Laughter rippled through the room, the kind of laughter that came easy to men with nothing better to do at 9 in the morning than drink and devise entertainments at others' expense. Preston was 23 years old and had never worked a day in his life. His father, Mayor Edmund Hale, owned the Red Hollow Bank and Trust, which meant Preston owned the town's respect whether he deserved it or not. He had delicate hands, a weak chin hidden behind a carefully groomed beard, and eyes that sparkled with the particular malice of those who'd never faced real consequences. "I've got an idea," he announced, swinging his boots off the table and sitting forward with the kind of manufactured excitement that preceded his worst schemes. "Entertainment for the whole town!" His companion, a rail-thin man named Chester Boone, who worked as the mayor's clerk, leaned in. "What kind of entertainment?" "The educational sort." Preston's smile could have curdled milk. "See, I've been thinking about old Cole Maddox out at Iron Ridge Ranch. Man's got that black devil of a stallion that put 2 of his hands in the ground last year. Nobody can get near the beast without risking their neck." "What's that got to do with the Harper girl?" "Everything, Chester. Everything." Preston pulled a silver coin from his pocket and began walking it across his knuckles, a trick he'd practiced for hours to impress saloon girls who were paid to be impressed. "We tell Miss Lila that Cole's looking for help with a horse. Tell her he'll pay $5, no, $10, for an afternoon's work. Girl that size, doing laundry and hauling water for every widow and invalid in town, $10 might as well be a fortune." Understanding dawned on Chester's face, followed by a grin that showed his tobacco-stained teeth. "She'll go out there expecting work, and instead she'll walk into a barn with a 1,200-pound killing machine that hasn't let a human within 10 feet of it in 6 months." Preston laughed, a high, whinnying sound. "Can you imagine? That big girl running from Cole's ranch, crying, dress probably torn to ribbons? It'll be the talk of Red Hollow for months. What if she gets hurt?" Preston shrugged, the gesture conveying perfectly calibrated indifference. "Then she'll have learned a valuable lesson about knowing her place. Either way, we get a show." He stood, adjusting his brocade vest, imported from San Francisco, a fact he mentioned at least 3 times daily. "Spread the word quietly. I want a crowd ready by this afternoon. Not too obvious, mind you. We'll station people along the road to Iron Ridge, make it look natural. Folks tending their gardens, mending fences, just happening to be out when she walks by on her way to humiliation." Chester hesitated, something almost like conscience flickering across his features. "Preston, I don't know. Lila Harper never did nothing to nobody. She just keeps to herself, does honest work. Which is exactly why this will be so entertaining." Preston clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make the smaller man wince. "Honest work. Honest Lila. Honest, plain, big-boned Lila who doesn't have the sense to know when she's being made a fool of. Trust me, Chester, by sunset tonight you'll be thanking me for the best laugh you've had all year." By 10 o'clock, Chester had knocked on Lila Harper's door. She answered with flour on her hands and a smudge of it across one cheek. At 24 years old, Lila stood 5'9" in her bare feet, not extraordinarily tall for a woman, but her build made her presence impossible to ignore. She had shoulders that could carry a loaded clothesline pole from one end of a yard to the other, arms that showed the definition of real labor, and a waist that fashion magazines would have called unfortunate but farmers' wives called practical. Her face would have been pretty if anyone had bothered to look at it properly. She had clear gray eyes, high cheekbones, and a mouth that tilted naturally toward kindness. But Red Hollow had decided long ago what Lila Harper was. A workhorse, a joke, a cautionary tale mothers told their daughters about what happened when you let yourself go, and the town saw only what it wanted to see. "Morning, Miss Lila," Chester said, hat in hand, playing his role with the practiced ease of a career sycophant. "Sorry to interrupt your baking." "No interruption, Mr. Boone. What can I do for you?" Her voice was low and pleasant, with the patient tone of someone accustomed to being underestimated. "Well, it's more what you can do for Cole Maddox out at Iron Ridge Ranch." Chester delivered the lie smoothly, looking her straight in the eye. "He's got a situation with a horse, a stallion that's gone mean. Heard tell you've got a way with animals, and he's willing to pay good money for someone to help settle the beast down. $10 for an afternoon's work." Lila's eyes widened slightly. $10. She made perhaps $12 in a good month, cobbling together laundry work, mending, occasionally helping with difficult births when the doctor was unavailable. $10 would mean she could finally afford to fix the leak in her roof before winter, maybe even have enough left over for a new dress that actually fit properly, instead of the let-out, hand-me-down things she wore now. "Mr. Maddox asked for me specifically?" Doubt crept into her voice. "I've never met the man." "That's Cole for you. Doesn't get into town much, but word gets around about people's talents." Chester managed to say this without a trace of irony. "Between you and me, I think he's desperate. That horse has been nothing but trouble, and he can't afford to lose any more hands to broken bones. Needs someone with a gentle touch and enough strength to not get pushed around. Thought of you immediately." It was almost believable. Lila had indeed calmed difficult animals before. Mrs. Peterson's milk cow that had gotten tangled in wire fencing, the Robertson boys' dog that had gone half wild after getting caught in a trap. She had strong hands and a patient temperament, and animals seemed to sense it. "When would he need me?" "Today, if you're able. This afternoon. Just head out to Iron Ridge Ranch. It's about 3 miles west on the Old Canyon Road. Can't miss it. Big iron gate with the ranch brand." Lila looked back into her small house, thinking of the bread dough rising in the kitchen, the laundry half hung in the yard, the mending she'd promised Mrs. Chen by Thursday. Then she thought about the leak in her roof, about the embarrassment of holding a bucket under dripping water every time it rained, about having enough money to hold her head up for once instead of always scraping by. "I'll go," she said. "Let me finish up here and I'll head out after lunch." "Wonderful." Chester's smile was too wide, too practiced. "I'll let Mr. Maddox know to expect you. And Miss Lila, you might want to wear something you don't mind getting dirty, barn work and all." After he left, Lila stood in her doorway for a long moment, a sensation she couldn't quite name prickling at the back of her neck. Something about the interaction felt off. Chester Boone had never been anything but cold to her, and here he was, hat in hand, calling her Miss Lila, like she was somebody worthy of respect. But $10. 10 whole dollars. She went inside to finish her bread. By noon, half of Red Hollow knew about the prank. The knowledge spread the way cruel secrets always do in small towns. Whispered over fence lines, shared in the general store, passed between women hanging laundry and men shoeing horses. Some people thought it was funny. Others felt the sick twist of conscience but said nothing, unwilling to cross Preston Hale or his father's considerable influence. A few, a very few, thought it was wrong. Thomas Chen, who owned the mercantile, stood behind his counter and listened to 2 ranch hands laugh about what was planned. When they left, he turned to his wife Margaret with disgust plain on his face. "We should warn her," he said. Margaret's hands stilled over the account books. "Preston would make our lives hell, Thomas. You know he would. His father controls the credit lines for every business in this town." "So we just let that girl walk into humiliation?" "She's not a girl, she's a grown woman. And maybe," Margaret's voice dropped, "maybe it won't be as bad as they think. Maybe she'll surprise them." Thomas wanted to believe that, but he'd seen the black stallion at Iron Ridge Ranch once, from a distance, when he delivered supplies. The animal was magnificent and terrifying, pure violence wrapped in midnight hide. And Lila Harper, for all her strength and kindness, was just a woman who'd never been given a fair chance by this town. He said nothing, did nothing, like everyone else. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Lila Harper set out for Iron Ridge Ranch. She wore her most practical dress, brown cotton that had been let out twice and still pulled tight across her shoulders. Her boots were men's work boots, bought secondhand because they were the only ones that fit properly. She'd braided her dark blonde hair tightly and pinned it up, and she carried nothing but a small cloth bundle with some bread and cheese in case the work ran long. The day was beautiful. October in western Colorado painted the canyon lands in impossible colors. Red rock glowing like embers, golden aspens shimmering against pine-dark mountainsides, a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The road to Iron Ridge followed a creek that ran clear and cold, and Lila found herself humming as she walked. She didn't notice the watchers. They were subtle about it. Mrs. Brennan, suddenly intensely interested in her garden near the edge of town. Two men mending a fence that didn't need mending, positioned perfectly to watch the road. A group of teenage boys who just happened to be fishing near the creek crossing, though none of them had poles in the water. Lila noticed none of it. She was thinking about $10 and a fixed roof, and maybe, just maybe, the possibility that someone like Cole Maddox, a man who lived alone and didn't come to town, a man who might not know or care about Red Hollow's opinions, might see her as someone useful, someone capable, instead of someone to mock. The walk was longer than 3 miles, closer to 4, and it was uphill. By the time Lila reached the iron gate bearing the Iron Ridge brand, sweat dampened her dress and her feet ached. But the ranch that spread before her took her breath away. Iron Ridge sat in a natural basin surrounded by red rock walls that glowed in the afternoon sun. The ranch house was built of local stone and timber, 2 stories tall, with a wide porch and shutters painted dark green. The barn was enormous, easily big enough for 30 horses. Corrals stretched in neat geometric patterns, though most stood empty. A bunkhouse, a smithy, a chicken coop, a well with a good pump, all of it spoke of prosperity and careful planning. But it also spoke of emptiness. No hands worked in the corrals, no smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. The whole place had an abandoned quality, like a stage set waiting for actors who never arrived. Lila pushed open the gate and walked up the long drive. Her boots crunched on gravel. Somewhere a crow called, harsh and mocking. Otherwise, silence. "Hello?" she called out. "Mr. Maddox? Mr. Boone said you were expecting me." No answer. She approached the barn. The doors stood partially open, enough to see darkness within, but not enough to reveal what that darkness contained. And then she heard it. A sound that raised every hair on her arms. A scream, high and terrified and unmistakably equine. Not the neigh of a horse calling to others, but the shriek of an animal in pain or panic. It came from deep within the barn, echoing off the walls, followed by the crash of hooves against wood. Bang! 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 Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Lila didn't think. She ran. She shoved through the barn doors and stopped, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. The barn smelled of hay and leather, and something else. The copper tang of blood and the acrid scent of animal fear. Another crash. She followed the sound to the back of the barn, where the largest stalls stood. What she found there drove the breath from her lungs. The black stallion was magnificent even in his terror. He must have stood 17 hands high, pure black except for a small white star between his eyes. His coat gleamed like polished obsidian where it wasn't matted with sweat and blood. But he was trapped. Someone, and Lila would never know if it was malice or catastrophic negligence, had left rope rigging in the stall, probably from a previous attempt to restrain the animal. The stallion had gotten tangled in it. One rear leg was caught, pulled at an angle that had to be agonizing. The rope had wrapped around a support beam and then somehow looped back around the horse's neck. Every time the animal struggled, the rope tightened around his leg, around his throat. He was strangling himself in his panic, his eyes rolled white. Foam flecked his muzzle. Fresh blood ran down his leg where the rope had cut through hide. And he was making that sound, that terrible too-human scream. For a frozen moment, Lila simply stared. This was not a job. This was not what Chester Boone had described. This was an animal dying by inches, alone in the dark. Then training she didn't know she had took over. Years of being underestimated had taught Lila to be calm in chaos. Years of being dismissed had taught her to act when others hesitated. She approached the stall door slowly, her hands visible, making herself as small and non-threatening as a woman her size could manage. "Easy," she murmured. "Easy now. I see you. I know it hurts. I'm going to help." The stallion's head swung toward her, ears flat against his skull. He screamed again, a sound that seemed to tear from his chest. His front hooves struck out, barely missing the stall door. Lila didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that showing fear to an animal only increased their panic. Instead, she began to hum, low and steady, a tuneless sound that she'd discovered could soothe frightened creatures. It wasn't a lullaby or a song, just a drone of sound that said, "I'm here, I'm calm, you're not alone." She opened the stall door carefully, just enough to slip through. The stallion had perhaps 6 feet of mobility, limited by the cruel geometry of the rope. If he charged, there would be nowhere for her to go. "That's right," she hummed. "I see how scared you are. That rope is hurting you. I know. I'm going to fix it, but you have to trust me. Just for a minute. Can you do that?" The horse's breathing was labored, sides heaving. He was exhausted from fighting. That might be the only thing that saved them both. He'd spent his strength on panic and had little left for violence. Lila moved to his side, keeping up that steady hum. She put one hand on his shoulder, and the stallion flinched but didn't strike. His coat was wet with sweat and hot to the touch. "Good," she whispered. "Good boy. Let me look." The rope situation was worse up close. The knot around the beam was pulled drum-tight by the horse's weight. The loop around his neck had cinched down dangerously. But his leg, that was the immediate crisis. The rope had cut deep enough to expose muscle. If they didn't get it off soon, he might never walk properly again. Lila looked around desperately for a knife. Nothing. The barn was eerily empty of tools, as if someone had deliberately cleared it out. Of course they had. This wasn't an accident. This was the punchline to Preston Hale's joke. She was supposed to run home crying after finding herself alone with this vicious animal, or perhaps get hurt just enough to be entertaining, but not enough to cause legal problems for the Hale family. Well, they'd underestimated her before. They could underestimate her again. Lila set her feet, got her fingers under the rope around the stallion's neck, and pulled. The rope was thick hemp, swollen with the horse's sweat, and pulled tight by hundreds of pounds of panicked animal. It shouldn't have been possible for a human to loosen it without tools, but Lila Harper had spent her entire life being strong. Not gym strong or show strong, but work strong. The kind of strength that came from carrying water buckets, wringing out sheets, hauling furniture, lifting feed sacks. Her hands were scarred from wash water and calloused from labor, and her arms held the kind of functional power that fashion magazines never celebrated, but farmers' wives knew intimately. She dug her fingers under the rope and hauled backward with everything she had. The stallion screamed and tried to rear, but the rope around his leg held him. For one terrible second, Lila thought she'd made it worse, thought he'd pull them both down into a tangle that would end with broken bones or worse. Then the rope loosened. Just an inch. Just enough. "Again," she grunted, shifting her grip. "One more time." She pulled. Tendons stood out in her neck. Her shoulders burned. The rope cut into her palms hard enough to draw blood. And it gave. Enough slack for the horse to lower his head, to ease the strangling pressure. He stood there, sides heaving, while Lila worked the rope the rest of the way off his neck. Then she turned her attention to his leg. This was more delicate. The rope had cut deep, and removing it might cause a fresh flow of blood, but leaving it would cripple the animal permanently. "This is going to hurt," she told the stallion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She worked quickly, ignoring the risk of those powerful hind legs, focusing entirely on the knot. Her fingers were slippery with blood. His and hers mixed together, but she could feel the give in the rope, the way it wanted to unwind. There. The knot loosened. She unwrapped the rope carefully, trying not to jar the leg. The stallion whimpered, an almost human sound of pain, but held still. Finally, blessedly, the rope fell away. Lila staggered backward, giving the horse room. He stood there, head low, leg held gingerly off the ground. Blood ran down to his hoof. But he was breathing normally now. The panic had left his eyes. She collapsed against the stall wall, her own legs shaking so badly she couldn't stand. Her hands throbbed. Her shoulders felt like they'd been pulled from their sockets, and she was crying, ugly, heaving sobs of relief and rage and exhaustion. That was when she heard the voice. "What in God's name are you doing in my barn?" Lila's head snapped up. Cole Maddox stood at the stall door, and he was holding a rifle. He was tall, 6'3" at least, with the kind of lean, hard build that came from years of physical labor. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. His hair was black and shaggy, hanging almost to his shoulders. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale gray like winter sky, and currently blazing with fury. He was also, she realized with a sick drop in her stomach, one of the most handsome men she'd ever seen. I said, "What are you doing in here?" His voice was rough, unused to conversation, with a southwestern drawl that suggested Texas or maybe Oklahoma. The rifle wasn't pointed at her, but it wasn't exactly pointed away from her either. Lila's voice came out as a croak. She wiped at her face with the back of one bloody hand, probably smearing it worse. "Mr. Boone said you needed help with a horse, that you'd pay $10. I came to work." "Chester Boone told you that?" "Yes, sir." Cole's eyes narrowed. He took in the scene with a tracker's attention to detail. The freed rope, the injured stallion standing calmly despite his wounds, Lila's bleeding hands, her tear-streaked face, the way she'd positioned herself protectively between him and the horse despite the rifle. "I never sent for help." His voice was quieter now, but no less dangerous. "And Chester Boone hasn't set foot on my property in 3 years. Understanding crashed over Lila like cold water. The too generous pay. Chester's uncharacteristic kindness. The empty ranch. The vicious stallion that someone had deliberately trapped in rope. She'd been set up. This whole thing had been a prank, probably with half the town watching and waiting for her to come running back to Red Hollow, humiliated and broken. Heat flooded her face. She wanted to sink through the floorboards. Instead, she stood, her legs still trembling. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Maddox." She tried to keep her voice steady and mostly succeeded. "I was misled. I'll leave immediately." "Hold on." He lowered the rifle completely now, leaning it against the stall. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." "And Midnight?" He gestured at the stallion. "What happened to him?" "He was tangled in rope, around his leg and his neck. He was—" Her voice cracked. "He was strangling himself. I got it off him, but his leg needs tending. The rope cut deep." Cole moved into the stall, his movements careful and practiced. The stallion's ears flicked toward him, but didn't flatten. He ran his hands down the injured leg with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his harsh exterior. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "This was deliberate. Someone rigged this." "You think?" Lila couldn't finish the sentence. The idea that someone had deliberately hurt an innocent animal just to make her look foolish made her stomach turn. "I know so. That rope work is too precise to be accidental. Someone wanted Midnight to panic, wanted him to look dangerous when you got here." Cole's jaw tightened. "The whole damn town probably knew about it. They sent you up here as entertainment." The words hit like physical blows. Lila had known she was a joke to Red Hollow, but to learn that they'd hurt an animal, that they'd risked her life, all for a laugh? "I should go." She couldn't look at him. "I'm sorry for the trouble." "Where?" "I'm sorry?" "Where are you going to go?" Cole straightened up, and even in the dimness of the barn, his eyes were intense. "Back to town? Back to the people who thought it would be funny to send you into a death trap? Who are probably watching the road right now, waiting to see you run home crying?" Lila had no answer. He was right. Walking back to Red Hollow now after this would be the final humiliation. She could practically hear the laughter. Cole seemed to come to some decision. "You saved Midnight's life. That rope, another hour and he'd have been dead. You walked into what should have been a fatal situation and kept your head long enough to help him. That takes courage. And you clearly know your way around animals." "Mr. Maddox, I wasn't lying when Chester said I need help. I've been running this ranch alone for 6 months. Lost my last hand when Midnight kicked him. Not the horse's fault. The man was drunk and mean. Haven't been able to find anyone willing to work for a rancher everyone says is crazy." He looked at her directly. "I'll pay you $3 a week, plus room and board. You can stay in the ranch house. There's a spare bedroom. Honest work, no funny business. Lila stared at him. You want to hire me? After I trespassed in your barn? You didn't trespass. You were lured here by people who wanted to hurt you. That's different. Cole moved to a shelf and pulled down a tin of salve and clean bandages. Here, see to your hands while I think this through. Think what through? How to make this right. You were wrong today, miss. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. Harper. Lila Harper. Well, Miss Harper, those bastards in Red Hollow thought they were sending you to me for a laugh. What if we gave them something else to laugh about? A ghost of a smile crossed his face, and Lila saw that he must have been handsome before whatever weight he carried had carved those hard lines around his mouth. What if you went back to town tonight, not crying and defeated, but riding beside me with a job offer? Think that might spoil their fun? Lila's hands had started to shake again, but for a different reason now. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know you saved my horse. I know you didn't run when any sensible person would have. And I know... He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features before his expression hardened again. I know what it's like to be this town's entertainment, to be the story they tell to make themselves feel better. There was history there, pain buried deep. Lila recognized it because she carried her own version. $3 a week, she said slowly, and room and board, plus use of the ranch facilities. There's a good kitchen, a bathing room with hot water, comfortable bed. He said it matter-of-factly, but Lila heard what he wasn't saying, that these were luxuries she probably didn't have in whatever boarding house or shack she called home. And you want me to ride back to town with you? Tonight? I want to see Preston Hale's face when you come back employed instead of humiliated, but only if you're willing. No pressure. You can take time to think. Yes. The word came out before Lila could second-guess it. Yes, I'll do it. Cole's eyes widened slightly, as if he'd expected her to refuse. Just like that? Just like that. Lila looked down at her bleeding palms, then up at the stallion standing quietly in his stall, then finally at this strange, harsh, lonely man who'd just offered her something no one in Red Hollow ever had. A fair chance. I'm tired of being their joke, Mr. Maddox. If you're serious about this, then I accept. Cole. If we're going to work together, you should call me Cole. Then you should call me Lila. They shook hands. His grip was careful of her injuries, but firm. She felt the calluses on his palm, working hands, like hers. Well then, Lila, Cole said, and there was something like satisfaction in his voice. Let's go introduce you to the rest of Red Hollow's evening entertainment. But first, we need to tend to midnight properly, and you need to clean up. Town can wait another hour. Let them wonder. Cole worked with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and precise as he tended to Midnight's wounds. Lila watched from outside the stall, her own hands now wrapped in clean bandages, as he cleaned the rope burns with a solution that made the stallion flinch but not fight. Hand me that tin, Cole said, gesturing toward a shelf without looking up. The blue one. Lila retrieved it and passed it through the stall rails. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she noticed how careful he was not to touch her bandaged palms. This is going to take time to heal, he said, spreading a thick salve over Midnight's leg. Rope burns are nasty, cut right through the hide. He paused, his jaw tightening. Whoever rigged this knew exactly what they were doing, knew how a panicked horse would react. You think it was Preston? Preston Hale wouldn't know which end of a rope to use, but he'd pay someone who did. Cole's voice was flat, emotionless, in the way that suggested he was containing something much hotter beneath. Man's been trying to buy Iron Ridge for 2 years. Thinks if he makes my life difficult enough, I'll sell cheap and move on. Why does he want your ranch? Cole's hands stilled for a moment. His father wants it. Mayor Hale has plans for this whole valley, wants to bring in mining operations, sell off parcels to investors back east. But Iron Ridge sits right in the middle of the best water access. Without it, his grand plans don't work. He resumed wrapping Midnight's leg with clean cloth. I told him the ranch isn't for sale. That didn't sit well. Lila absorbed this information, understanding dawning. So when Preston decided to humiliate me, he saw an opportunity to hurt you at the same time. Two birds, one stone. Gets to embarrass you and make me look like I've got a dangerous animal I can't control. Maybe stir up enough trouble that the sheriff gets involved, declares midnight a menace. Cole straightened up, running a hand down the stallion's neck. Man's nothing if not efficient with his cruelty. The bitterness in his voice told Lila this wasn't the first time Preston had targeted him. She wanted to ask more, but sensed that Cole Maddox wasn't a man who opened up easily, and pushing would only make him close down further. There, Cole said, stepping out of the stall and latching it securely. That's the best I can do for now. He'll need monitoring, but the leg should heal clean if we keep it wrapped and dry. He looked at Lila properly for the first time since they'd started working. You should clean up before we head to town. I'll show you the house. They walked across the yard in the lengthening shadows of late afternoon. Up close, the ranch house was even more impressive than Lila had first thought. The stonework was expert craftsmanship. Each rock fitted perfectly against its neighbor. The porch wrapped around two sides of the building, and the windows were real glass, not the oiled paper some ranches made do with. Cole opened the front door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The gesture was so automatic, so ingrained, that Lila knew he'd been raised with manners even if he'd forgotten how to use most of them. The interior took her breath away. The main room was large and open, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and furniture that looked hand-built but comfortable. A thick rug covered the wood floor. Bookshelves lined another wall, packed with volumes that showed signs of actual reading, cracked spines, dog-eared pages. A desk sat beneath one window, covered with ledgers and what looked like ranch accounts. But it was the light that struck her most. The western-facing windows caught the late afternoon sun and threw it in golden bars across the floor, illuminating every corner. It was a room meant to be lived in, warm and welcoming, yet it felt hollow somehow, like a stage set waiting for a play that never started. Kitchen's through there, Cole said, pointing to a doorway. Bathing room is off the kitchen. I installed a cistern on the roof last year, catches rainwater and heats it with the sun. There's a pump if you need to fill it. Bedrooms are upstairs. You can take the one on the right at the top of the stairs. It's got a good bed and a window facing east, so you'll get morning light. He recited all this in the same flat tone he might use to list supplies, but Lila heard what he wasn't saying, that he'd thought about these details, had built or arranged them with care, even though he lived here alone. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Cole looked uncomfortable with the compliment. It's functional. Bathroom's got soap and towels. I'll wait down here. Lila climbed the stairs, her boots loud on the wood. The bedroom he'd indicated was simple but comfortable. A bed with a real mattress and clean linens, a dresser with a mirror, a chair by the window, a washstand with a pitcher and basin. The window looked out over the corrals and beyond them to the Red Rock Canyon walls glowing in the afternoon sun. She stood there for a moment, trying to reconcile this room, this house, this opportunity, with the morning she'd started. Had it really been just hours ago that she'd been baking bread in her tiny rented room, worried about a leaking roof? The bathing room was a revelation. Cole had understated it significantly. The cistern system he'd rigged up was ingenious, with pipes that ran through a small water heater before feeding into a large copper tub. There were clean towels stacked on a shelf, several kinds of soap, and even a mirror on the wall. Lila washed her face and hands carefully, mindful of the bandages. The water that ran off was tinged pink with blood and brown with barn dust. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, hair coming loose from its braid, eyes too bright, cheeks flushed. She looked wild. She looked alive. She looked furious. The anger had been building since Cole had confirmed what she'd already suspected about the prank. Now, as she cleaned up and prepared to face Red Hollow, it crystallized into something hard and cold in her chest. For 24 years, she'd absorbed this town's mockery with quiet dignity. She'd kept her head down, done her work, never complained. And this was how they repaid her, with elaborate cruelty designed purely for their entertainment. Well, if they wanted a show, she'd give them one. When Lila came back downstairs, Cole had changed into a clean shirt and had tamed his hair somewhat, though it still brushed his shoulders. He'd also strapped on a gun belt, she noticed, a well-maintained Colt revolver sitting low on his hip. "You expecting trouble?" she asked. I'm expecting Preston Hale to be in town, and Preston gets unpredictable when his jokes don't land the way he planned. Cole checked the cylinder of the revolver, a gesture so practiced it looked like breathing. I won't start anything, but I'll be ready if he does. I don't want you fighting on my account. I won't be. Cole's eyes met hers, and there was something fierce in them now. I'll be fighting on mine. Preston's been pushing for 2 years. Maybe it's time someone pushed back. They walked to the barn together. The sun was lower now, painting everything in shades of amber and crimson. Cole let out a large bay gelding, already saddled, and then to Lila's surprise brought out a second horse, a sturdy gray mare with kind eyes. "This is Artemis," he said, handing Lila the reins. "She's gentle, but she's got spirit. Thought you might prefer to ride in rather than walk." Lila stared at the horse, then at Cole. "I've never ridden before." His eyebrows rose. Never? Never had reason to. Never had a horse. Something shifted in Cole's expression, not pity exactly, but a recognition of how limited her life had been. "It's not hard. Artemis will follow my horse. Just hold the reins loose and sit steady. I'll walk us slow until you get comfortable." He helped her mount, his hands carefully impersonal as he adjusted the stirrups for her longer legs. Once she was settled, he swung onto his own horse with easy grace. "How do you feel?" he asked. Lila sat high above the ground, her hands gripping the saddle horn perhaps tighter than necessary. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alert." Cole urged his horse forward at a slow walk. "Just relax into it. Let your hips move with her gait. That's it." They rode down the long drive toward the iron gate. With each step, Lila felt herself adjusting to the rhythm of the horse beneath her. It was strange and exhilarating and nothing like walking. She was aware of the power of the animal, of how easily it could throw her if it chose to, and of how it chose not to. When they reached the gate, Cole dismounted to open it, then remounted smoothly. "Ready?" Lila thought about Red Hollow waiting at the end of this road. She thought about Preston Hale and Chester Boone and all the people who'd positioned themselves to watch her humiliation. She thought about her tiny rented room and the laundry tubs and the years of quiet, invisible degradation. "Ready," she said. They rode toward town. The first watcher they passed was Mrs. Brennan, still pretending to tend her garden in the fading light. Her head snapped up when she saw them coming, her eyes going wide at the sight of Lila Harper mounted on a horse, riding beside Cole Maddox like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lila kept her chin up and her eyes forward. Cole did the same. They didn't acknowledge the woman at all, just rode past like she was part of the scenery. "Did you see her face?" Lila murmured once they were out of earshot. "That's nothing," Cole replied. "Wait until we get to Main Street." The two men mending fence actually stopped working to stare. One of them dropped his hammer. Cole touched the brim of his hat to them with exaggerated politeness. Lila mimicked the gesture. By the time they reached the edge of town proper, the sun had set and the street lamps were being lit. Red Hollow's main street was busy with the evening crowd. Men heading to the saloons, women finishing shopping, children playing in the last light. And all of them, it seemed, had positioned themselves to witness Lila Harper's return. The conversations died as they rode in. One by one, heads turned, mouths fell open. Cole guided them straight down the center of Main Street at a leisurely walk, giving everyone plenty of time to get a good look. Lila forced herself to sit straight, to keep her expression neutral, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. They were halfway down the street when Preston Hale emerged from the Dusty Rose Saloon, Chester Boone at his heels. Preston's face was flushed. He'd clearly been drinking in anticipation of Lila's humiliation. When he saw her mounted and calm beside Cole Maddox, his expression went from smug anticipation to confused anger. "Well, well," he called out, his voice carrying down the street. "Look what the cat dragged in. Tell me, Miss Harper, how did you enjoy your visit to Iron Ridge?" Cole's hand moved to his gun, but Lila spoke before he could respond. "It was enlightening, Mr. Hale." Her voice was steady, louder than she'd ever spoken in public before. "I learned a great deal about horses, rope work, and cruelty." Preston's smile faltered. "Cruelty? I sent you to help with a job. You sent me into a barn with an animal deliberately trapped and injured, hoping I'd be hurt or frightened enough to provide you with entertainment. Lila's anger, held in check for hours, leaked into her words like acid. You rigged a horse to strangle itself just to make me look foolish. That's not a prank, Mr. Hale. That's malice. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Preston's face darkened. That's a serious accusation. You have any proof? The rope work was expert, Cole said quietly, his hand still resting on his gun. Someone who knew horses set that trap. And everyone in this town seems to have known Miss Harper was heading to my ranch this afternoon. Interesting how that information spread so fast from a job offer I never made. Preston's eyes narrowed. You calling me a liar, Maddox? I'm calling you what you are, a bully who hurts animals and people for sport. Cole's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. And I'm telling you and everyone else here that Lila Harper now works for me at Iron Ridge Ranch. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Works for you? Preston laughed, but it sounded forced. Doing what? Scaring off the other livestock. Before Cole could respond, before Lila could feel the familiar sting of that kind of mockery, a voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Preston. Thomas Chen stepped forward from where he'd been watching outside his mercantile. His wife Margaret stood in the doorway behind him, her face tight with disapproval, aimed not at Lila, but at Preston. Mr. Chen, Preston said with exaggerated surprise, didn't expect to see you defending the help. I'm not defending anyone. I'm saying what everyone here knows but won't admit. Thomas's voice shook slightly, but he held his ground. We all knew what you planned today. We knew you were sending Miss Harper into danger as a joke. And most of us said nothing because we're afraid of your father's bank and your family's influence. He looked at the gathered crowd. But silence makes us complicit. What happened today was wrong. And I, for one, am glad she came back safe and employed instead of hurt and humiliated like you intended. A long silence followed. Lila saw several people in the crowd look away, shame on their faces. Others stared at Thomas like he'd grown a second head. Margaret Chen stepped forward to stand beside her husband. I agree. Lila Harper has done washing and mending for half the families in this town. She's never been anything but honest and hardworking. She deserved better than this. Preston's face had gone from red to purple. You're making a mistake, Chen, both of you. Your father doesn't own everything, Margaret said quietly, and some things are more important than credit lines. Preston looked like he wanted to argue, but the crowd's mood had shifted. Instead of the eager anticipation of earlier, there was an uncomfortable awareness settling over Main Street. People were remembering the laundry Lila had done for them, the mending she'd finished when they needed it, the quiet competence they'd taken for granted while still treating her as a joke. This isn't over, Preston said finally, pointing at Cole. You think you can embarrass me in front of the whole town? You think you can harbor that? Choose your next words very carefully, Cole interrupted, his voice soft and dangerous. His hand hadn't moved from his gun. Because if you insult Miss Harper one more time, I'll forget we're on a public street. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Preston was younger, better dressed, backed by his father's money and influence. But Cole Maddox looked like exactly what he was. A man who'd faced down harder things than a spoiled banker's son and hadn't blinked. Preston looked away first. Come on, Chester, he muttered, turning back toward the saloon. I need another drink. The crowd began to disperse, conversations starting up again in hushed tones. Lila could feel their eyes on her, assessing, judging, trying to reconcile the woman they'd dismissed with the one sitting straight-backed on horseback beside Cole Maddox. Thomas Chen approached them, his hands clasped nervously. Miss Harper, I owe you an apology. I knew what Preston planned, and I said nothing. I should have warned you. Lila looked down at him from her elevated position on the horse. She saw the genuine remorse on his face, saw the courage it had taken for him to speak up in front of the whole town. You spoke up when it mattered, Mr. Chen. That's more than most. If you need supplies for your work at the ranch, Margaret added, we'd be happy to extend you credit. Fair prices, no games. I appreciate that, Mrs. Chen. Lila felt something loosen in her chest. Not everyone in Red Hollow was cruel. Some were just afraid. I'll keep it in mind, Cole nodded to the Chens. Much obliged for your words. They'll be remembered. He touched Lila's arm gently. We should get back. It's getting dark. They rode out of town the way they'd come, at the same unhurried pace, but this time, when people watched them pass, it wasn't with mockery or anticipation. It was with confusion, with grudging respect, and in a few cases, with fear. Because Preston Hale had just been publicly challenged, and everyone knew he wouldn't let that stand. The ride back to Iron Ridge took on a different quality in the darkness. The canyon walls that had glowed red in the afternoon sun were now black silhouettes against a star-filled sky. The only sounds were the soft clop of hooves, the creak of leather, and the occasional cry of a nightbird. Lila found herself relaxing into the rhythm of riding, her earlier fear replaced by a strange sense of peace. Up here on horseback, moving through the night beside this quiet, dangerous man, she felt further from her old life than the few miles that separated them from town. "You handled yourself well back there," Cole said finally, breaking the long silence. "I was terrified." "Couldn't tell. You looked like you were carved from stone." There was something like approval in his voice. "Preston expected you to crumble. When you didn't, he had nowhere to go. He'll come after you now. After the ranch." "He was always going to come after the ranch. Now at least we know where we stand." Cole glanced at her in the darkness. "You sure you want to get tangled up in this? It's not going to be easy. Preston's going to make trouble, and his father has real power in this county." Lila thought about her rented room, her washing tubs, her years of invisible servitude. She thought about the roof that leaked and the clothes that never quite fit, and the constant grinding knowledge that she would never be enough for Red Hollow's approval. "I'm already tangled up in it," she said. "Might as well see it through." They reached the ranch as the moon rose, painting everything silver. Cole helped her down from the horse, and Lila's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. "First time riding does that," Cole said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "You'll be sore tomorrow. There's liniment in the bathing room if you need it." He led both horses into the barn, and Lila followed, watching as he unsaddled them with practiced efficiency and settled them in their stalls with fresh water and hay. When he came to Midnight's stall, he paused, checking the stallion's bandages in the lamplight. "How's he doing?" Lila asked. "Restless but stable. The leg will heal." Cole looked at her over the stall door. "You saved his life today. I want you to know that. Another hour alone in that trap, and he'd have broken his leg or strangled. Either way, I'd have had to put him down. I couldn't just leave him suffering. Most people would have. Most people would have run the moment they saw him tangled up like that." Cole's eyes were serious in the lamplight. "You're either very brave or very foolish, and I haven't decided which yet." "Maybe both." That surprised a laugh out of him, a short, rusty sound like he'd forgotten how. "Yeah, maybe both." They walked back to the house together. Inside, Cole lit lamps while Lila stood uncertainly in the main room, suddenly aware that she was about to spend the night alone in a house with a man she barely knew. As if reading her thoughts, Cole said, "I know this is an unusual situation. You have my word. You're safe here. This is a working arrangement, nothing more. Your room has a lock on the door if that makes you more comfortable." "Thank you." Lila meant it. Lila's. She believed him, oddly enough. For all his rough edges and dangerous reputation, Cole Maddox had shown her more respect in one afternoon than Red Hollow had in 24 years. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Help yourself to anything. We'll start work tomorrow. I'll show you the ranch, explain what needs doing." Cole moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Lila?" "Yes?" "What you did today, standing up to Preston, not letting him see how much it hurt, that took courage. I know this wasn't the job you thought you were coming for, but I'm glad you're here." Before she could respond, he climbed the stairs and disappeared into what must be his bedroom. She heard the door close softly. Lila stood alone in the main room, lamplight flickering around her, and let herself feel the full weight of the day. The walk to the ranch, the terror in the barn, the moment she'd decided to stay, the ride back to town, and the confrontation on Main Street. All of it crashed over her now that she was finally alone. She should have been exhausted. Instead, she felt electric, alive in a way she'd never experienced before. In the kitchen, she found bread, cheese, some cold chicken, and fresh vegetables. She made herself a simple meal and sat at the sturdy wooden table to eat. Through the window, she could see the barn, lit by moonlight, and beyond it, the dark shapes of the canyon walls. This was her home now, this ranch, this strange partnership with a man who seemed as damaged and isolated as she felt. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like something clicking into place, like a door opening that she hadn't known existed. Lila finished her meal, cleaned up carefully, and climbed the stairs to her new room. The bed was more comfortable than anything she'd slept on in years. As she lay in the darkness, her body aching from the day's exertions, she found herself thinking not about what she'd left behind, but about what lay ahead. Somewhere in Red Hollow, Preston Hale was nursing his wounded pride and plotting revenge. The sensible thing would be to fear that, to worry about what he might do. But Lila had spent her whole life being sensible, being careful, trying to make herself small enough that the world wouldn't notice her. Where had that gotten her? To a rented room with a leaking roof and a town full of people who saw her as entertainment. No more. If Preston wanted a fight, he'd get one. And this time, Lila Harper wouldn't be facing it alone. She fell asleep thinking about the black stallion in the barn, the way he'd calmed under her touch, the way his trust had felt like a gift. Tomorrow she'd check his wounds, help Cole with whatever work needed doing, and start building something new. Let Preston Hale come. She'd face down a panicked horse in a dark barn. She could face down a spoiled banker's son. Outside, the moon climbed higher, painting Iron Ridge Ranch in shades of silver and shadow. In the barn, Midnight shifted in his stall, testing his injured leg. In the main house, Cole Maddox lay awake in his own room, staring at the ceiling and wondering if hiring Lila Harper was the smartest decision he'd made in years or the biggest mistake of his life. And in town, Preston Hale sat in the Dusty Rose Saloon, buying rounds for anyone who'd listened to his complaints, his rage growing with each drink. He'd been humiliated in front of the whole town. By Cole Maddox. By that oversized washerwoman. By the Chens. Someone would pay for that. He'd make sure of it. The pieces were all in place. The board was set. And neither Lila nor Cole had any idea how far Preston was willing to go to restore his wounded pride and secure Iron Ridge Ranch for his father's plans. But they'd find out soon enough. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Lila woke each morning before dawn, drawn from sleep by the sound of Cole moving around downstairs, the smell of coffee drifting up through the floorboards. She dressed quickly in the practical work clothes he'd advanced her money to buy from the Chen's mercantile. Sturdy cotton shirts and canvas trousers that Margaret Chen had ordered specially, ignoring the scandalous nature of a woman wearing men's clothing. By the time she came downstairs, Cole would have breakfast started. They'd eat together in companionable silence, then head out to begin the day's work. Cole had been right about the ranch needing help. What he hadn't mentioned was how much work two people could accomplish when both were willing to put their backs into it. Lila learned to muck stalls, mend fences, check water troughs, and treat minor injuries in the livestock. Cole taught her to ride properly, spending patient hours in the corral as she learned to move with Artemis instead of against her. He showed her how to read the sky for weather, how to spot signs of predators near the stock, how to manage the delicate balance of a working ranch. In return, Lila brought order to the house that had been missing since Cole's wife had died 3 years earlier. She learned this detail one evening when she'd asked about the women's clothes stored in a trunk in the attic, and Cole had gone very still before explaining in a flat voice that Sarah had taken fever one winter and never recovered. He didn't elaborate, and Lila didn't push, but it explained the hollow quality of the house, the sense of a space built for more life than it currently held. She cooked meals that Cole ate with quiet appreciation, organized the chaos of his record-keeping, and slowly transformed the ranch house from a masculine fortress into something that felt like a home. And every evening, she spent an hour with Midnight, changing his bandages and talking to him in that low, steady voice that seemed to reach something in the stallion that no one else could touch. The horse's leg healed slowly but surely. Within 2 weeks, he was putting weight on it. Within 3, he was moving around his stall without limping. And through it all, he remained gentle with Lila in a way that astonished Cole. "I've never seen anything like it," Cole said one evening, leaning on the stall door as Lila brushed Midnight's gleaming coat. "He nearly killed a man 6 months ago. Wouldn't let anyone near him. And here you are, treating him like a pet dog." "He's not mean," Lila replied, running the brush down Midnight's shoulder. "He's been hurt and he's scared. Animals aren't that different from people. You treat them with respect and patience. They usually return the favor. Cole was quiet for a moment. You talking about horses or something else? Lila met his eyes over Midnight's back. Both, maybe. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were both wounded creatures who'd been given a second chance, and they were both determined not to waste it. But Red Hollow hadn't forgotten them. Every trip into town for supplies became an exercise in navigating hostile territory. Some people, like the Chens, remained friendly. Others turned cold, unwilling to cross the Hale family, and Preston himself watched from the shadows, his presence a constant threat that never quite materialized into action. Until it did. The first sign of trouble came on a crisp morning in late November. Cole rode out to check the north pasture fence and came back 3 hours later with his jaw set and his eyes hard. "Someone cut the wire," he said without preamble, dismounting in the yard where Lila was working on repairing a saddle. Clean cuts, deliberate. 20 head of cattle got through before I noticed. Took me 2 hours to round them up. Lila's hand stilled on the leather. "Preston? Can't prove it, but who else?" Cole pulled off his gloves with sharp, angry movements. "This is how it starts. Little things. Harassment that's hard to pin down. Make life difficult enough that I give up and sell." "What are we going to do?" "We?" Cole looked at her sharply. "This isn't your fight, Lila. You can walk away anytime." "Can I?" She set down the saddle and stood, brushing off her hands. "You think if I left now, Preston would suddenly leave me alone? I embarrassed him just as much as you did. Maybe more. Because I was supposed to be the punchline, not the one who got the last laugh." Cole opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right, and they both knew it. The harassment escalated. Someone left the gate to the chicken coop open, and coyotes killed half the flock. A section of the barn roof was damaged in a way that looked like storm damage but couldn't have been. Supplies ordered through the mercantile arrived late or not at all, and when Cole confronted the freight company, they claimed confusion about the delivery address. Through it all, Cole and Lila kept working. They repaired what was broken, replaced what was lost, and refused to show the strain. But Lila could see it wearing on Cole. He slept less, rode the property boundaries more frequently, and developed a habit of checking the sight lines from the house like a man expecting an attack. "You need to rest," Lila told him one evening, after he'd come in well past dark for the third night in a row. "You're running yourself into the ground. Can't rest. Someone has to keep watch." "Then let me help. We can take shifts." Cole shook his head. "You're already doing more than I have any right to ask." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Lila moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "Cole, you hired me to help with the ranch. Well, protecting it is part of that. You can't do everything alone." "I've been alone for 3 years. I know how to manage." "Managing isn't the same as living, and running yourself to exhaustion won't save Iron Ridge if something happens." She softened her voice. "Please, let me help." Something in Cole's expression cracked. For just a moment, she saw past the hard exterior to the exhausted, grieving man underneath. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll take shifts." That night, Lila took the watch from midnight until dawn. She sat on the porch with a rifle across her knees, watching the dark shapes of the canyon walls and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. It should have been frightening, but instead she felt strangely peaceful, useful, like she was finally doing something that mattered. She was still there when Cole emerged at first light, looking surprised to find her awake and alert. "Anything?" he asked. "Quiet night. Saw a coyote near the chicken coop around 3, but he moved on when I fired a warning shot." Cole's eyebrows rose. "You fired the rifle?" "You think I don't know how?" Lila stood, stretching muscles stiff from the cold. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. Said a woman living alone needed to know how to protect herself." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was. Died when I was 16. Mama followed a year later." Lila handed him the rifle. "I'm going to start breakfast. You should sleep a few hours." "Lila? Sleep, Cole. That's an order." To her surprise, he smiled. "Yes, ma'am." December arrived with the first serious snow. The ranch took on a stark beauty, red rock dusted white, smoke rising from the chimney into gray skies. Cole taught Lila how to care for livestock in winter, how to break ice on water troughs, how to watch for signs of cold stress in the animals. They were checking the cattle in the south pasture when Cole suddenly went still, his hand moving to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "What is it?" Lila asked quietly. "Riders. 3 of them, coming from the east." He kept his hand on the rifle but didn't draw it yet. "Could be drifters, could be trouble." The riders materialized out of the snow like ghosts. 3 men on horseback, dressed in heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats, pulled low against the weather. They didn't look like drifters. They looked like hired guns. The leader was a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He reined in his horse about 20 feet from where Cole and Lila sat mounted. "Cole Maddox?" His voice was rough, like gravel scraping. "Who's asking?" "Name's Jack Rourke. We're looking for work. Heard you might be hiring." "You heard wrong. I've got all the help I need." Cole's tone was level, but his body language screamed danger. "Best you move on." Rourke's eyes flicked to Lila, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "That right? Because it looks to me like you're running this whole operation with just one woman for help. That's ambitious." "The lady's more capable than most men I've worked with. We manage fine." Cole's hand tightened on his rifle. "Now I've told you polite-like that we're not hiring. Don't make me tell you again less polite." The 2 men flanking Rourke shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. The tension stretched tight as a wire. "Easy now," Rourke said, holding up one hand in a gesture of false peace. "No call for hostility. We're just looking for honest work." "Then you're in the wrong place. Try the Barty Ranch, 10 miles south. They're always looking for winter hands." "Maybe we will." Rourke gathered his reins, but his eyes never left Cole's face. "Though I have to say, Mr. Maddox, a man in your position might want to reconsider having more help around. Winter in these parts can be dangerous. Accidents happen, especially to folks who are understaffed." It wasn't quite a threat. It was too carefully worded for that. But the implication was crystal clear. Cole's face could have been carved from stone. "I appreciate your concern, but Iron Ridge has weathered plenty of winters, and it'll weather this one just fine. Now, unless you have actual business here, I suggest you move along before the snow gets worse." Rourke smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Fair enough. Come on, boys. Let's leave these good folks to their work." The 3 men turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come, disappearing into the falling snow. Cole and Lila sat frozen, watching until they were completely out of sight. "That was a warning," Lila said quietly. "That was Preston." Cole's jaw was tight. Those weren't ranch hands looking for work. Those were hired thugs, and he sent them to make a point. What kind of point? That he can get to us anytime he wants, that we're isolated out here, that accidents happen. Cole turned his horse toward home. "We need to be more careful. No more working alone. We stay inside of each other, and we stay armed." The fear Lila had been holding at bay suddenly felt very real. "Cole, maybe we should go to the sheriff. Tell him what's happening." "Sheriff Dalton?" Cole laughed bitterly. "He's been in Mayor Hale's pocket for years. We tell him Preston's harassing us, and all we'll do is give them warning that we know what they're planning." "So what do? "We stay alert. We protect what's ours, and we don't give them any excuse to escalate." Cole looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "You still sure you want to stay? Because things are going to get worse before they get better." Lila thought about running, about finding somewhere safe and quiet where Preston Hale's reach couldn't find her. But then she thought about midnight, about the ranch that had become her home, about the man beside her who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "I'm staying," she said firmly. "Whatever comes." Whatever comes arrived faster than either of them expected. 3 days later, they woke to find the barn on fire. Lila smelled the smoke first, jolting awake in the pre-dawn darkness, with her heart already racing. She ran to the window and saw orange light flickering against the snow, smoke billowing black against the gray sky. "Cole!" She was running before she finished shouting, taking the stairs 3 at a time, not bothering with boots or coat. "The barn's on fire!" He burst from his room already half-dressed, and together they ran across the snowy yard. The heat hit them 20 feet from the barn, intense enough to make them stagger back. "The horses!" Lila screamed over the roar of the flames. The barn doors were closed, locked from the outside. Someone had deliberately trapped the animals inside. Cole didn't hesitate. He grabbed an axe from the woodpile and swung it into the lock, once, twice, 3 times until the metal shattered. The doors swung open and a wall of heat and smoke poured out. "Cover your face!" Cole yanked his shirt up over his nose and plunged into the inferno. Lila grabbed a horse blanket from the fence, soaked it in the water trough, and followed him in. The smoke was blinding. She could barely see 3 feet ahead, could barely breathe. Somewhere in the hellish darkness, horses screamed in terror. She followed the sound, her hands outstretched until she found a stall door. Artemis. The gray mare was kicking at the walls, eyes rolling white with fear. Lila fumbled with the latch, finally got it open, and slapped the horse hard on the rump. "Go! Get out!" Artemis bolted past her toward the rectangle of dawn light that marked the barn doors. Lila moved to the next stall, and the next, releasing terrified animals into the smoke and praying they'd have the sense to run toward the light. She'd freed 4 horses when she realized she couldn't find Midnight's stall. The smoke was too thick, the heat too intense. She was turned around, disoriented, her lungs burning with each breath. "Lila," Cole's voice rough with smoke, "where are you?" "I don't know. I can't find Midnight." And then she heard it. That same terrified scream she'd heard the first day she'd come to Iron Ridge. Midnight was trapped again, and this time the trap was made of fire. Lila dropped to her knees where the smoke was thinner and crawled toward the sound. Her hands found wood, then metal, the stall door. She reached up, found the latch, and pulled. Nothing. It was stuck, warped by heat or deliberately jammed. "Cole, I found him, but the door won't open." Cole materialized out of the smoke like a ghost. He assessed the situation in seconds, then positioned himself beside the door. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. They both threw their weight against it. The door shuddered but held. Above them, a beam cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Embers rained down, setting fire to the hay scattered across the floor. "Again!" Cole shouted. This time the door burst open. Midnight stood inside, cornered and terrified, but alive. Unlike that first day, though, he recognized Lila. When she reached for his halter, he didn't fight her. "Come on, baby," she coughed, her voice barely working. "Time to go." She led him out of the stall. Cole was already moving toward the doors, creating a path through the smoke and fire. Lila followed, one hand on Midnight's halter, the other holding the wet blanket over her face. They were 10 feet from safety when another beam gave way. It fell directly in their path, blocking the door in a shower of sparks and flaming debris. Cole didn't pause. He grabbed a shovel leaning against the wall and started beating at the burning beam, trying to clear enough space to get through. "We don't have time." Lila could feel the heat on her back intensifying. The whole barn was going to collapse any second. "There's another way!" Cole pointed toward the back of the barn. "The loading door, can you make it with the horse?" Lila looked at the wall of smoke and fire between them and the back door. It was impossible. It was suicide. She tightened her grip on Midnight's halter. "We can make it. When you get outside, ride for town. Get the sheriff, get help. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Go." Lila pulled Midnight forward into the smoke. She couldn't see, could barely breathe, but she could feel the horse's warm bulk beside her, and she used it to orient herself. Forward. Keep moving forward. Her shoulder hit the wall. She felt along it, searching for the door. Her hand found the latch. She pulled. The door swung open and cold, clean air rushed in. Lila and Midnight stumbled out into the snow together, both of them coughing, both of them singed and smoking but alive. Behind them, the barn groaned like a dying beast. "Cole!" Lila screamed. "Cole, get out!" For 5 eternal seconds, nothing. Then he appeared in the doorway, his shirt on fire, his face blackened with soot. He dove through the opening and rolled in the snow, putting out the flames. The barn collapsed behind him with a roar that shook the ground. Fire shot into the sky, turning the pre-dawn darkness bright as noon. The heat was so intense that Lila had to back away, pulling Midnight with her until they were 100 yards from the inferno. The other horses had scattered across the property, but they were alive. She could see them in the distance, silhouettes against the burning barn. All of them had made it out. Cole pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. He swayed, and Lila caught him, supporting his weight. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're back. Later." He was looking past her, his eyes fixed on something in the darkness beyond the fire's light. "We have company." Lila followed his gaze. 3 riders sat on horseback about a quarter-mile away, silhouetted against the dawn sky. Too far to identify, but close enough to have watched the whole thing, close enough to have started it. One of them raised a hand in a mocking salute. Then all 3 turned and rode away, disappearing into the gray light of morning. "Preston," Cole said, and the word was full of such cold fury that Lila felt it like a physical force. "We have to go to the sheriff now. They tried to kill us, Cole. They burned down the barn with the horses trapped inside. And we have no proof it was them, no witnesses except us, and we're the ones with a grudge against the Hale family." Cole's voice was bitter. "You think Sheriff Dalton will take our word over Preston's? But the riders could have been anyone. Could have been drifters who saw the fire and stopped to watch. Could have been good Samaritans making sure we got out safe." He shook his head. "I know how this works, Lila. Mayor Hale owns this county. His son can burn our barn to the ground, and there's nothing we can do about it legally." "Then what do we do?" Cole looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never seen before. Not anger, not determination, but something colder, calculation. "We rebuild," he said quietly. "And we make sure that the next time Preston Hale comes for us, he regrets it." The sun rose over Iron Ridge Ranch, illuminating the smoking ruins of the barn, the scattered horses, and 2 people standing in the snow covered in soot and ash but still standing, still fighting. Preston Hale had made his move. Now it was their turn. The ride into Red Hollow 2 hours later carried a weight that neither of them spoke about. Cole had insisted on tending to the horses first, making sure they were secured in the temporary corral they'd rigged near the house. Lila had cleaned the worst of the soot from her face and changed into fresh clothes, but her hands still shook as she saddled Artemis. Cole's burns weren't as bad as they'd looked in the firelight, but they were bad enough. The back of his shirt had melted in places, fusing with his skin. Lila had treated the wounds with what supplies they had, her fingers gentle but thorough, and Cole had taken it in silence, his jaw locked tight against the pain. Now they rode side by side toward town, and the weight between them was the knowledge that this was no longer about harassment or intimidation. Someone had tried to kill them, had trapped living animals in a burning building and watched from the shadows to see if they'd escape. The morning was crystalline and cold, the snow from the night before creating a pristine blanket over the landscape. It should have been beautiful. Instead, every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every distant rider a potential enemy. "What are you going to tell the sheriff?" Lila asked, breaking the long silence. "The truth. That someone set our barn on fire in the middle of the night. That the doors were locked from the outside. That we saw 3 riders watching from a distance." Cole's voice was flat, emotionless. "And then we'll watch him do absolutely nothing about it." "You sound certain." "I am. Sheriff Dalton hasn't made a decision that didn't serve Mayor Hale's interests in 5 years. This won't be any different." Cole glanced at her. "I'm not riding in there expecting justice, Lila. I'm riding in there to establish a record. So when this escalates further, there's documented proof of the pattern. When it escalates, not if." Preston's committed now. He went from petty vandalism to arson, from harassment to attempted murder. A man who crosses that line doesn't usually step back from it. Cole's hand rested on his gun, a gesture that had become automatic. "He'll come again. Next time, he'll make sure to finish the job." They reached the edge of town as the church bells rang 9 o'clock. Red Hollow was awake and bustling, people going about their morning business with the comfortable routine of those who hadn't spent the night fighting for their lives against a fire. Word of their arrival spread faster than the flames that had consumed the barn. By the time they'd tied their horses outside the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered. Lila recognized many of the faces from that first humiliating ride into town months ago. The expressions ranged from curious to hostile to something that might have been concern. Sheriff Marcus Dalton was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a thick mustache and eyes that never quite met yours directly. He looked up from his desk when Cole and Lila walked in, and his face tightened with something that could have been irritation or guilt. "Mr. Maddox, Miss Harper." He didn't stand. "What brings you to town so early?" "Someone burned down my barn last night," Cole said without preamble. "Locked the doors from the outside with 8 horses trapped inside. We barely got them out alive." Dalton's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation. You have any proof it was arson?" The lock on the outside doors was deliberately fastened. The fire started in 3 separate places based on the burn pattern, and we saw 3 riders watching from a distance as the barn burned. "See their faces?" "Too far away, too dark." "Then you don't know who they were." "I know exactly who they were," Cole said, his voice low and dangerous. "Same men who've been harassing my property for weeks. Same men who work for Preston Hale." Dalton leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "Now that's a mighty serious claim, Mr. Maddox. You're accusing the mayor's son of attempted murder. You better have more than suspicion and bad blood to back that up." "I have a pattern of escalating violence. I have motive. Preston wants Iron Ridge for his father's development plans. I have opportunity. Those riders were on my property in the middle of the night." Cole leaned forward, his hands flat on Dalton's desk. "What I don't have is a sheriff willing to investigate." "Watch your tone." Dalton's face reddened. "I'll investigate any crime that's been committed, but I won't go harassing upstanding citizens based on the paranoid fantasies of a man who's had a grudge against the Hale family since he cut himself off, but the damage was done." Cole went very still. "Since what, Sheriff? Since Mayor Hale tried to force me to sell after Sarah died? Since he sent men to convince me that a grieving widower couldn't possibly manage a ranch alone?" Cole's voice was soft now, deadly. "Or since I made it clear that Iron Ridge would never be for sale, no matter how much pressure he applied?" The tension in the small office was thick enough to cut. Lila stood beside Cole, her hand hovering near her own sidearm, watching the sheriff's face cycle through anger, guilt, and resignation. "I'll ride out and take a look at the damage," Dalton said finally. "Make a report. But without witnesses or proof of who set the fire, there's not much I can do." "Of course there isn't," Cole straightened up. "Just like there wasn't much you could do about the cut fences, or the poisoned water trough last month that killed 3 head of cattle, or any of the other incidents we've reported. Now you listen here. No, you listen." Cole's voice cracked like a whip. "I came here to file a formal complaint and establish a record. I've done that. When something worse happens, and we both know it will, I want it documented that I came to you for help and you refused to act." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And Sheriff, when this is over, when the truth comes out about who's been behind all this, I'm going to make sure everyone in this county knows exactly what kind of lawman you are." They walked out into the bright morning, leaving Dalton fuming behind his desk. The crowd outside had grown larger. Lila could feel their eyes on her like physical weights, could hear the whispers starting up before they'd even reached their horses. "Cole." The voice was quiet but carried authority. Thomas Chen stood at the edge of the crowd, his wife Margaret beside him. They both looked shaken. "We heard about the fire," Margaret said, stepping forward. "Is it true? Your barn is gone?" "Burned to the ground," Cole confirmed. "Someone locked the doors from outside. We barely got the horses out." A murmur ran through the crowd. Thomas and Margaret exchanged a look that held entire conversations. "This has gone too far," Thomas said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A man's property, his livelihood, his life threatened. This isn't right. You saying you know something about who did this, Chen?" Sheriff Dalton had followed them out, his hand resting on his gun belt in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "I'm saying that when a man reports harassment for months and nothing is done, when violence escalates and still nothing is done, it makes people wonder whose interest the law serves." Thomas held his ground despite the sheriff's glare. "And I'm saying that some of us in this town remember what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's not convenient." "Careful, Thomas," Dalton warned. "That's starting to sound like you're interfering with an investigation." "What investigation?" Margaret's voice was sharp. "You just told them you can't do anything without proof. That's not an investigation, Sheriff. That's an excuse." The crowd had gone silent now, watching this confrontation unfold. Lila saw uncertainty on many faces, saw people beginning to question what they'd been willing to ignore for months. A new voice cut through the tension. Well, well, quite the gathering. Preston Hale emerged from the Dusty Rose saloon, Chester Boone trailing behind him like a faithful dog. Preston looked fresh and rested, his clothes expensive and clean. The contrast between him and Cole, still smelling of smoke, his face drawn with exhaustion and pain, couldn't have been starker. I heard there was some excitement at Iron Ridge last night, Preston said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. A fire, wasn't it? How terrible! I do hope the animals made it out safely. Cole's hand moved to his gun. Lila grabbed his arm, holding him back. They did, she said, her voice steady despite the fury burning in her chest. No thanks to whoever set the fire. Preston's eyes widened in theatrical shock. Set it! You think someone deliberately burned your barn? My goodness, that's a serious accusation. I can't imagine who would do such a thing. Can't you? Cole's voice was barely controlled. Because I can. I can imagine it very clearly. Now, Cole, I know you've been under a lot of stress, trying to run that big ranch with inadequate help, dealing with all those unfortunate accidents. Preston's smile was poison. It's only natural that you might start seeing conspiracies where there are none. Perhaps the fire was simply an accident. An oil lamp knocked over, some careless handling of a cigarette. The doors were locked from the outside. Were they? How strange. Perhaps they blew shut in the wind. These old barn doors can be tricky. Preston looked around at the crowd, playing to his audience. I just think it's sad when a man lets paranoia override common sense. Maybe Mr. Maddox should consider my father's very generous offer to purchase Iron Ridge before something truly tragic happens. The threat was barely veiled. Lila felt Cole tense beside her, felt the violence coiling in his muscles like a spring wound too tight. Is that what this is about? She asked, stepping between Cole and Preston before something terrible happened. You burned down his barn to force a sale? Preston turned his attention to her, and his smile grew colder. Miss Harper. Still playing rancher, I see. Tell me, how does it feel to trade one kind of servitude for another? At least when you were doing laundry, people paid you honestly. What exactly are you getting out of this arrangement? The implication was clear and disgusting. Lila felt heat flood her face, but she held her ground. I'm getting honest work, fair pay, and respect. 3 things you wouldn't recognize if they bit you. Respect? Preston laughed. Is that what we're calling it? The whole town knows what you really are, Lila. You're a charity case, Cole's pet project, a joke that stopped being funny months ago. That's enough. Cole's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. You've made your point, Preston. You can hurt us, harass us, burn our property, but here's what you need to understand. Iron Ridge isn't for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You can escalate all you want. The answer will still be no. Preston's smile faded. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I'm making is standing here talking to you instead of rebuilding what you destroyed. Cole took Lila's arm gently. Come on. We have work to do. They mounted their horses as the crowd watched. Lila could feel the weight of all those eyes, could hear the whispers starting up again. But she also saw Thomas and Margaret Chen standing firm, saw a few other faces in the crowd that looked uncertain, questioning. They rode out of town in silence, but this time the silence felt different, dangerous, like the quiet before a storm breaks. They were halfway back to Iron Ridge when Cole suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. His eyes were fixed on something ahead, his body gone tense. What is it? Lila asked. Riders. Coming fast. Lila followed his gaze and saw them, 3 horses galloping toward them from the direction of the ranch. As they got closer, she recognized the lead rider, Jack Rourke, the man who'd come looking for work weeks ago. Cole's hand went to his rifle, pulling it from the saddle scabbard in one smooth motion. Get behind me. Cole. Now, Lila. She moved Artemis behind his larger bay gelding, her own hand finding the revolver Cole had insisted she carry after the barn fire. Rourke and his 2 companions slowed as they approached, spreading out in a loose line that blocked the road. Up close in daylight, they looked even more dangerous than they had before. These were hard men, men who'd killed before and would kill again if the price was right. Mr. Maddox, Rourke said, his scarred face splitting in a grin. Fancy meeting you here. Move aside, Cole's rifle was pointed at the ground, but everyone could see how fast he could raise it. Can't do that. Got a message for you, from a mutual friend. I don't have any friends who associate with men like you. Rourke chuckled. Fair point. Let's call him a mutual acquaintance then. He wanted me to make sure you understand the seriousness of your situation. I understand it perfectly. Someone wants my ranch badly enough to commit arson and attempted murder. Tell your employer that his message was received. Now get out of my way. See, that's the thing. Rourke's hand moved to rest on his gun. I don't think you do understand. The fire last night was a warning. A gentle one, all things considered. You got your horses out, you and the lady survived. Next time might not be so considerate. The two men flanking Rourke shifted in their saddles, their intentions clear. You threatening us in broad daylight on a public road? Cole's voice remained steady. That's bold. Not a threat. A promise. My employer is a patient man, but his patience has limits. Iron Ridge is going to change hands one way or another. The question is whether you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, or whether you get carried away in a pine box. Lila felt ice slide down her spine. This wasn't posturing or intimidation anymore. This was a death sentence being delivered with casual efficiency. And what about her? Cole asked, nodding toward Lila. She's got nothing to do with this. She made her choice when she stayed. Bad choices have consequences. Rourke's eyes fixed on Lila, and she saw something in them that made her stomach turn. Pretty thing like that, though. Be a shame if something happened to her because of your stubbornness. Cole's rifle came up so fast it was a blur. The barrel centered on Rourke's chest. You just made a fatal mistake, Cole said quietly. You threatened her. The two other riders reached for their guns. Lila drew hers, the weight of it suddenly very real in her hand. For a frozen moment, they all held position, guns drawn, death balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. The morning was absolutely silent except for the harsh breathing of horses and men. Then hoofbeats, coming from town. A group of riders crested the hill behind them, 6 men, led by Thomas Chen. They weren't armed like gunfighters, but they carried rifles, and they outnumbered Rourke's group 2-1. Everything all right here? Thomas called out as they approached. Rourke's jaw tightened. Whatever he'd been planning, it didn't include witnesses. He lowered his gun slowly, and his companions followed suit. Just having a conversation, he said, about property values and such. Looked like more than that from where we were riding. Thomas positioned his horse beside Cole's, and the other men fanned out behind him. We heard about the fire at Iron Ridge. Thought we'd ride out, offer some help with the cleanup. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. Thomas had followed them from town, had brought backup because he'd suspected something like this might happen. But it was a lie that saved lives. Rourke looked at the assembled men, calculating odds, and apparently decided they weren't in his favor. We'll continue this conversation another time, Mr. Maddox. You think about what I said. He and his men turned their horses and rode back toward town at a leisurely pace, making it clear they weren't running, just postponing. Cole lowered his rifle but didn't put it away. Thomas, you have terrible timing. Do I? Thomas's smile was thin. From where I sat, my timing was perfect. Could have gotten yourself killed. So could you. So could Lila. Thomas looked between them. Margaret and I talked after you left. We're done standing by and watching. Preston Hale has gone too far, and it's time someone said so publicly. You know what that'll cost you, Cole warned. Mayor Hale controls the credit lines. He can destroy your business. Let him try. We've got money saved, and we've got friends beyond Red Hollow. More importantly, we've got a conscience that won't let us watch good people be murdered in broad daylight. Thomas looked at the 5 men who'd come with him, ranchers and shopkeepers, men with families and reputations to protect. We're not the only ones who feel this way. There are folks in Red Hollow who are tired of the Hales running things like their personal fiefdom. One of the other riders spoke up, a grizzled rancher named James Mitchell. That fire last night woke some people up, made them realize this isn't just about you and Preston anymore. If they can do this to Iron Ridge, they can do it to any of us who get in their way. Cole looked overwhelmed, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to have allies. I appreciate this, more than I can say. But you need to understand what you're getting into. Preston's hired killers, real ones. This is going to get ugly. Then we'll be ready. Mitchell patted his rifle. Most of us fought in the war. We know how to handle ugly. Lila watched this exchange with a growing sense of unreality. An hour ago, they'd been alone against impossible odds. Now, suddenly, they had allies. It didn't make them safe, but it made them less vulnerable. "What's your plan?" Thomas asked Cole. "Rebuild the barn, reinforce defenses at the ranch, wait for Preston to make his next move, and be ready for it." Cole's expression was grim. "And maybe start making some moves of our own." "What kind of moves?" Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mayor Hale's power comes from his bank. He controls credit, controls debt, controls people's livelihoods. But I've been doing some reading through Sarah's old papers. She was better educated than me, kept meticulous records, and she found some interesting discrepancies in the bank's accounting practices." Thomas's eyes widened. "You're talking about going after the bank?" "I'm talking about finding out if Mayor Hale's been using his position to engage in fraud. If we can prove that, we can bring in federal marshals. Get this out of the local jurisdiction where Dalton can bury it." "That's dangerous knowledge to be sitting on," Mitchell said slowly. "The kind of knowledge that gets people killed." "I'm already marked for killing. At least this way I might take them down with me." Cole looked at Lila. "But you don't have to be part of this, any of you. This is my fight." "It stopped being just your fight when they burned your barn," Lila said firmly. "I'm in this, Cole. All the way." Thomas nodded. "So are we." The other men murmured agreement. Cole's throat worked as he swallowed hard, his eyes suspiciously bright. "All right then, we do this smart. Thomas, can you quietly reach out to people you trust? We need to know who's with us and who's with the Hales. Mitchell, you and your boys willing to take shifts watching Iron Ridge? I don't trust Rourke not to come back." "Already planned on it," Mitchell said. "Good. Lila and I will start going through Sarah's records tonight. If there's evidence of fraud, we'll find it." Cole gathered his reins. "But we need to move fast. After today, Preston knows we're not backing down. He'll escalate quickly." They rode back to Iron Ridge as a group, and the sight of all those riders approaching the ranch should have been threatening. Instead, it felt like reinforcement, like hope. The barn was still smoking when they arrived, a blackened skeleton against the snow. Lila looked at it and felt a fresh surge of fury at the senseless destruction. But she also felt something else, determination. Preston Hale had wanted to break them. Instead, he'd forged them into something harder. The men helped Cole start planning the barn's reconstruction while Lila went to check on the horses. Midnight approached her immediately, nuzzling her shoulder with unusual gentleness, as if sensing her distress. "We're going to be okay," she told him, stroking his soft nose. "We're going to fight, and we're going to win, because we have to." The stallion whickered softly, and for a moment Lila let herself lean against his warm bulk, drawing comfort from his solid presence. That evening, after the other men had left and promised to return the next day to begin construction, Cole and Lila sat in his study surrounded by 3 years' worth of Sarah's meticulous financial records. "She was brilliant," Cole said quietly, running his fingers over her neat handwriting. "Saw patterns I would have missed. Look here, this loan to the Morrison Ranch. The interest rate jumped by 3% 6 months into the term, but there's no amendment to the original contract." Lila leaned in to look. "That's not legal, is it?" "Not without written agreement from both parties. And look at this pattern. It happened to 5 different ranchers over the course of 2 years. All of them eventually defaulted and had to sell their land. All of it went to holding companies that, if you trace them back," he flipped through several pages, "connect to Mayor Hale's various business interests. He was forcing them into foreclosure. Systematically, deliberately, and probably illegally." Cole pulled out another ledger. "Sarah was documenting it all. I think she was planning to report it before she died. I found this letter she'd drafted to a federal marshal, never sent." He handed it to Lila. The letter laid out a pattern of fraud, corruption, and abuse of power that went back nearly a decade. It was detailed, well-researched, and damning. "Why didn't she send it?" Lila asked. Cole's face tightened. "The date on it is 3 days before she died. I think she ran out of time." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Or maybe someone made sure she didn't get the chance." Lila's blood ran cold. You think the fever wasn't natural? I don't know. The doctor said it was pneumonia, that she'd been weak from a bad winter. But now, knowing what I know about how far the Hales are willing to go. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. They sat in heavy silence, both of them contemplating the implications. If Sarah's death hadn't been natural, if the Hales had killed her to protect their secrets, then there was no line they wouldn't cross. We need to get this information to someone outside the county, Lila said finally. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated. The nearest federal marshal is in Denver, 3 days' ride in good weather, longer in winter. Then one of us needs to make that ride. Not you. Cole's voice was firm. If they're watching, they'll know what it means if either of us leaves. They'll try to stop whoever goes. Then we need to be smart about it. Send someone they're not watching. Lila thought for a moment. What about Margaret Chen? She could say she's visiting her sister in Denver. Women travel for family reasons all the time. No one would think twice about it. Cole considered this. That could work, if she's willing. Let's ask her tomorrow. Lila stood, her back aching from hours bent over ledgers. Right now we both need sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Cole nodded but didn't move. He sat staring at Sarah's handwriting, lost in memories and regrets. Lila put a hand on his shoulder. She'd be proud of you, she said softly, for not giving up, for fighting back. She'd be furious I dragged you into this mess. She'd be wrong. I dragged myself in, and I'd do it again. Lila squeezed his shoulder gently. Good night, Cole. She climbed the stairs to her room, but sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house settling made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching riders. She lay in the darkness, her hand resting on the revolver Cole had given her, and wondered how many more nights she'd spend this way before it was over. One way or another, it would be over soon. Preston had been publicly challenged. His hired guns had been turned away. The evidence against his father was being compiled. There was no path forward now that didn't lead to confrontation. Lila just hoped they'd be ready when it came. Margaret Chen left for Denver 3 days later, tucked into a stagecoach with Sarah's carefully documented evidence sewn into the lining of her travel bag. She'd kissed Thomas goodbye in front of half the town, playing the role of dutiful wife visiting her ailing sister perfectly. No one suspected that she carried the means to destroy the Hale family's empire. No one except Preston. The attack came on the 4th night after Margaret's departure. Lila was on watch, sitting on the porch with a rifle across her knees and a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the December cold. The moon was 3/4 full, casting enough light to see the yard and the half-rebuilt barn where Mitchell and 2 other men slept, taking their turn as guards. She saw the riders before she heard them, dark shapes moving against darker shadows, coming from 3 different directions at once. Too coordinated to be random. Too many to be anything but an assault. Cole! She fired a warning shot into the air and dove for the cover of the porch railing as answering gunfire erupted from the darkness. Cole burst through the front door already armed, taking position beside her. In the barn she heard Mitchell and the others scrambling awake, their shouts mixing with the crack of rifles. The riders came fast, maybe a dozen of them, firing as they charged. Bullets splintered the porch railing and shattered windows. Lila fired back, not aiming for kills, but trying to slow them down, make them think twice about their approach. The house, Cole shouted. They're trying to pin us down so they can burn the house. He was right. Even as some riders pressed the frontal assault, others were circling around, carrying torches that flared bright in the darkness. They were going to do to the house what they'd done to the barn, trap them inside and burn them alive. We need to get to the horses. Lila fired twice more, saw one rider's torch go flying as her bullet found its mark. We can't defend against this many. Cole grabbed her arm. The canyon. There's a trail behind the house, leads up into the rocks, defensible position. What about Mitchell and the others? They'll have to hold the barn or retreat to town. We can't help them if we're dead. Another volley of gunfire emphasized his point. Move! They ran through the house, grabbing what supplies they could. Ammunition, water, the saddlebags with copies of Sarah's evidence. Outside the back door, the horses were already spooked by the gunfire, pulling at their tethers. Lila went straight to Midnight. The stallion was wild-eyed with fear, but when she put her hand on his neck, he steadied enough for her to swing onto his bare back. Cole mounted his bay gelding, and they were galloping toward the canyon trail when the first torch hit the house. The flames caught quickly, fed by the dry wood and winter wind. Lila looked back once and saw the home that had sheltered her for the past months going up in orange fury. The sight sent a spike of grief through her chest, but there was no time to mourn. They had to survive first. The canyon trail was treacherous in daylight. At night, with only moonlight to guide them and gunfire echoing behind them, it was nearly suicidal. But midnight seemed to sense the urgency, picking his way up the rocky path with surprising sure-footedness. Cole's gelding followed, and together they climbed higher into the labyrinth of red rock that surrounded Iron Ridge. Behind them, Lila heard shouts and more gunfire. Someone was following them up the trail. "There's a cave about half a mile up," Cole called back to her. "Narrow entrance, good sight lines. If we can make it there, we can hold them off." If. The word hung heavy between them. They pushed the horses harder, asking them for speed on terrain where a single misstep could mean a broken leg and a fatal fall. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Someone fired a shot that ricocheted off the rocks near Midnight's head, and the stallion surged forward with renewed panic. The cave entrance appeared suddenly, a dark gash in the canyon wall barely wide enough for a horse. Cole dismounted while still moving, pulling his gelding through the opening. Lila followed, practically falling off Midnight's back in her haste. Inside, the cave opened into a space large enough for the horses and two people, with a narrow entrance that could be defended by a single person with a rifle. Cole positioned himself at the opening while Lila secured the horses deeper in the cave, speaking to them in low, soothing tones despite her own racing heart. "How many?" she asked, moving to crouch beside Cole with her rifle ready. "At least 4 followed us up. More might be coming." He checked his ammunition. "We've got maybe 30 rounds between us. Need to make them count." The first rider appeared on the trail below, silhouetted against the burning ranch. Jack Rourke. Even at this distance, Lila recognized his scarred face and the way he sat his horse. "Maddox," Rourke's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "You're trapped up there. No water, no supplies, no way out. Come down now and maybe we'll let the woman live." "Go to hell," Cole shouted back. "Your choice. We can wait. You'll run out of ammunition long before we run out of patience. And when you do, we're coming in." It was a siege. They'd been outmaneuvered and outgunned, and now they were trapped in a cave with limited ammunition and no clear escape route. Down below, Iron Ridge burned, and somewhere in that chaos, Mitchell and the others were either dead or fled. They were alone. Lila settled in beside Cole, checking her own rifle. "How long can we hold them?" "Depends how patient they are. We've got elevation advantage and good cover. They can't rush us without taking casualties." He looked at her, his face grim in the moonlight filtering through the cave entrance. "But sooner or later we'll run out of bullets or they'll get smart and smoke us out. Either way, this doesn't end well." Margaret's been gone 4 days. If she pushed hard, she could be in Denver by now, could have the marshal on his way back. That's a lot of coulds. And even if she made it, even if the marshal believed her, it'll take days for help to arrive. We might not have days. They fell silent, both of them staring out at the burning ranch and the dark shapes of riders gathering below. Lila thought about her small rented room in Red Hollow, about the leaking roof and the washing tubs, and the simple, safe life she could have kept living. She could have accepted Preston's humiliation, could have stayed invisible and survived. Instead, she'd chosen this. Chosen to stand up, to fight back, to matter. And now she might die for that choice. Strangely, she found she didn't regret it. Better to die on her feet in a cave in the canyon than to live on her knees in town. "I'm glad I stayed," she said quietly. Cole looked at her. "Even now? With everything burning and us trapped like rats?" "Even now, these past months at Iron Ridge, they've been the first time in my life I felt like I mattered, like I was more than just a joke or a burden." She met his eyes. "Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that. You gave me that." Cole's throat worked. "Lila, Gunfire cut him off. The riders below were testing their defenses, firing up at the cave entrance. Cole returned fire, carefully placing his shots to make them count. One rider went down, clutching his shoulder. The others pulled back, regrouping. "They'll wait for dawn," Cole said. "Try to get a better angle on us in the light. We should rest in shifts, conserve our strength. You rest first. I'll watch. Lila, You're injured from the barn fire. Your back still isn't healed. Rest. I'll wake you if anything changes." He wanted to argue. She could see it in his face. But exhaustion won out. Cole settled against the cave wall, his rifle across his lap, and within minutes his breathing had evened into sleep. Lila kept watch through the long, cold night. Below, fires burned themselves out. The riders made camp, confident in their siege. And somewhere in the darkness, Iron Ridge Ranch smoldered, everything Cole and Sarah had built reduced to ash and memory. Dawn came slowly, painting the canyon walls in shades of pink and gold. With the light came clarity and horror. There were more riders now, maybe 20 in total. Rourke had been reinforced overnight, probably with every gun Preston could hire or coerce into service. Cole woke to the sight and swore quietly. He's committed everything to this. No half measures anymore. What do we do? We hold as long as we can. Maybe Mitchell made it to town. Maybe he's bringing help. But his voice carried no real hope. They both knew help wouldn't arrive in time. The morning dragged on in tense silence. The riders below showed no signs of rushing them, content to wait. Around mid-morning, someone tried to climb the trail to get a better angle on the cave. Cole shot him in the leg and he tumbled back down, screaming. No one else tried. By noon, they were down to 15 rounds of ammunition. Lila's throat was parched from thirst, and the horses were restless, smelling the water they couldn't reach. The sun beat down on the canyon, turning the cave into an oven. "I could try to slip out," Lila said. "Create a distraction while you make a run for it on horseback." "No." Cole's voice was flat, final. "We stay together." "Cole, be reasonable." "I said no. We've lost everything else. I'm not losing you, too." The raw emotion in his voice stopped her. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the hard exterior to the lonely, damaged man underneath. Saw how much her presence had meant to him, how her decision to stay had given him something to fight for beyond just survival. "Then we go together," she said. "When it comes to it, whatever happens." Cole nodded slowly. "Together." They were down to 10 rounds when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong, distant but growing closer. Not the crack of rifles or the shouts of men, but something else, something that made the riders below scramble to their feet in confusion. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. Coming fast from the direction of town. Cole moved to the cave entrance, risking a look. His eyes widened. "I don't believe it." "What? What is it?" "The whole damn town. Or half of it anyway. Thomas is leading them. Must be 30 riders, maybe more. They're armed and they're coming straight for Rourke's men." Lila pushed beside him to look. It was true. A column of riders was thundering up the road to Iron Ridge, and at their head rode Thomas Chen on a gray mare, carrying a rifle, and looking more determined than afraid. Behind him came ranchers, shopkeepers, even the blacksmith, men who'd chosen to finally take a stand against the Hale family's tyranny. And behind them, wearing a federal marshal's badge, rode a tall man on a black horse. Margaret had done it. She'd brought the law. The siege below dissolved into chaos. Rourke's hired guns weren't prepared for a fair fight. They'd been paid to intimidate and murder in the shadows, not to face down an army of angry citizens in broad daylight. Some tried to flee. Others tried to fight. All of them failed. The federal marshal, a grizzled man named Hayes who'd seen too many range wars to be intimidated by hired thugs, rounded up Rourke and his men with efficient brutality. The gunfight was brief and one-sided. By the time Cole and Lila made their way down from the cave, it was over. Thomas Chen helped Lila down from midnight, his face split in a relieved grin. "You're alive. Thank heavens you're alive." "How? When?" Lila couldn't form a complete sentence. "Margaret sent a telegram from the first town with a wire. We knew you'd need help fast, so Hayes deputized anyone willing, and we rode through the night." Thomas looked past her to the smoking ruins of Iron Ridge. "Looks like we almost didn't make it in time." "Mitchell?" Cole asked. "Alive. He and the others held the barn as long as they could, then retreated to town to organize the rescue party. Lost one man. Sam Rodriguez took a bullet to the chest. But he'll live." Marshal Hayes approached them, his weathered face grim. "You're Cole Maddox? I need you to come with me to Red Hollow. We're arresting Mayor Hale and his son on charges of fraud, corruption, arson, and conspiracy to commit murder. I'll need your testimony and any evidence you can provide." "It burned," Cole said flatly. "The house, the evidence, all of it." "Not all of it." Margaret Chen emerged from the crowd, pulling a package from her coat. "I made copies before I left. Kept one set with me, gave one to the marshal in Denver, and hid one with Father Murphy at the church. Your wife was thorough, Mr. Maddox. Her documentation is airtight." Cole took the package with shaking hands. "Sarah, she's still fighting for this place, even now." "Then let's make sure her fight wasn't in vain." Hayes turned to his deputies. "Let's move out. We have a mayor to arrest." The ride back to Red Hollow was surreal. What should have been a day of mourning, the loss of the ranch buildings, the near-death experience in the cave, instead felt like a strange victory parade. The townspeople who'd come to their rescue rode alongside them, their presence a statement that couldn't be ignored. Red Hollow was done being ruled by fear. They found Preston Hale in his father's bank, frantically packing papers into a satchel. The look on his face when Marshal Hayes walked in with a federal warrant was almost worth everything they'd endured. "This is a mistake," Preston blustered. "My father is the mayor. You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Hayes slapped handcuffs on Preston's wrists with satisfaction. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson and murder, among other charges. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." Mayor Edmund Hale was arrested in his office, surrounded by the ledgers that proved his decade-long scheme to defraud ranchers and force land sales. Sheriff Dalton, faced with evidence of his own complicity, resigned on the spot rather than face prosecution. Jack Rourke and his surviving men were loaded into a prison wagon, headed for the federal courthouse in Denver, where they'd stand trial for murder, arson, and a dozen other charges. Rourke's scarred face showed no emotion as the wagon pulled away, but Lila saw his eyes on her through the bars, cold, calculating, defeated. It was over. The realization came slowly, like waking from a nightmare to find the morning sun streaming through the window. The threat that had hung over them for months was gone. The Hale family's power was broken. Iron Ridge Ranch was safe. Except there was no Iron Ridge Ranch anymore, just smoking ruins and memories. That night, the town of Red Hollow held an emergency meeting in the church, the only building large enough to hold everyone who wanted to attend. Thomas Chen stood at the front, looking nervous but determined. "We're here to talk about the future," he began. "The Hales are gone. The bank is under federal receivership. But we still have a town to run and neighbors who need help. Cole Maddox and Lila Harper lost everything defending their home against a corrupt family. I propose we help them rebuild." Murmurs ran through the crowd, some supportive, some uncertain. James Mitchell stood up. "I've got timber on my land. I'll donate what's needed for a new barn and house. No charge." Another rancher rose. "I'll provide labor. My boys and I can frame a barn in a week if we have help." "I can supply hardware," someone else called out. "Nails, hinges, whatever's needed." One by one, people stood and offered what they could: materials, labor, food, shelter, while the work was being done. It was an outpouring of support that left Cole speechless and Lila in tears. Margaret Chen approached them after the meeting, her eyes bright. "You gave this town its backbone back. You showed us what it means to stand up to bullies, no matter how powerful they seem. This is the least we can do." The rebuilding began the next day. It seemed like the entire town descended on Iron Ridge Ranch with hammers and saws and determination. The new barn went up first, built larger and stronger than the old one. Then the house, designed by Cole with Lila's input. And this is where something remarkable happened. Cole designed the doorways wider, the ceilings higher. He built the kitchen with counters at a comfortable height for someone of Lila's stature, with sturdy chairs that didn't creak under weight. He reinforced beams and expanded rooms, creating a space that didn't ask Lila to make herself smaller, but instead celebrated her as she was. When Lila realized what he was doing, she found him in the partially completed kitchen, measuring for cabinets. "You're building this for me," she said quietly. Cole didn't look up from his measurements. "I'm building this for us. If you'll stay. If you'll—" He stopped, took a breath, started again. I'm not good with words, Lila, but these past months, you've become more than just someone who works here. You've become essential. To the ranch, yes, but also to me. And I thought, maybe if I built you a house that fit properly, you might consider staying permanently. Cole, are you asking me to marry me? He finally looked at her, and his eyes held all the vulnerability he usually kept locked away. I know I'm not much of a catch. I'm difficult and damaged, and I live in the middle of nowhere. But I love you. I think I started loving you the day you walked into my barn and saved Midnight without a second thought for your own safety. And I'm asking if you'd consider spending your life here, with me, building something new. Lila's vision blurred with tears. You love me. Completely, desperately, in a way that terrifies me because I already lost one person I loved and I don't know if I could survive losing another. She crossed the unfinished kitchen and took his hands in hers. Then it's a good thing I'm not going anywhere. Yes, Cole Maddox, I'll marry you. I'll stay here and build a life with you and probably drive you crazy with my stubbornness. I'm counting on it. He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that contrasted beautifully with his rough exterior. They married in the spring, when the canyon walls blazed with wildflowers and the new ranch stood complete and gleaming in the Colorado sun. Lila wore a dress of golden silk that Margaret Chen had ordered specially from San Francisco, a dress that fit perfectly, that didn't need letting out or taking in, that made her feel beautiful for the first time in her life. She walked through Red Hollow to the church with her head high, and the people who'd once mocked her now stood and applauded. Not because she'd changed, but because they had. Because she'd shown them what real strength looked like, and they'd finally learned to recognize it. The ceremony was simple, but packed with meaning. Thomas Chen stood as Cole's best man. Margaret was Lila's attendant. And when Father Murphy asked if anyone objected to the union, the only sound was the gentle whinny of Midnight from where he stood tied outside the church, as if adding his blessing to the proceedings. The reception was held at the rebuilt Iron Ridge Ranch, and it seemed like everyone in Red Hollow attended. They ate and drank and danced in the new barn, celebrating not just a wedding, but a new beginning for the whole town. As the sun set and the party continued, Cole led Lila away from the crowd to the edge of the property, where they could see the canyon walls painted in shades of orange and crimson. "Do you remember the first day you came here?" he asked. "How could I forget? I thought I was going to help with a horse, and instead I walked into a nightmare. And I thought you were the punchline to someone's cruel joke. Shows what I knew." He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "You were never a joke, Lila. You were always a fortress disguised as a woman, and I'm the luckiest man alive that you chose to make your stand here." Lila leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, and looked out over the ranch they'd fought so hard to save. The new buildings glowed in the sunset, stronger and more beautiful than what had burned. The horses grazed peacefully in the pasture, and in the distance, Red Hollow sat quiet and reformed, its days of cruelty hopefully behind it. "They sent me here to be humiliated," she said softly. "Instead, I found everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking for it. A home, a purpose, love. And I found someone who reminded me that surviving isn't the same as living, that it's worth fighting for something, even when the odds are impossible." They stood there as the sun sank below the canyon rim and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind them, the party continued, their friends and neighbors celebrating the wedding, the rebuilt ranch, the defeat of corruption, and the victory of people who refused to be broken. From that day forward, Iron Ridge Ranch became more than just a property. It became a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity, when strength was finally recognized and valued. People came from all over the county to see the ranch that had defied the Hale family, to meet the woman who'd saved it, to hear the story of how one person's decision to stand up had changed everything. And every time someone asked Lila how she'd had the courage to face down hired guns and burning buildings, she'd smile and say the same thing. "I was already the joke. I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Sometimes that's all the courage you need." But Cole knew better. He'd seen her in that barn with Midnight, seen her face down Preston Hale in the street, seen her refuse to run when running would have been the smart choice. Lila's courage hadn't come from having nothing to lose. It had come from knowing her own worth, even when the world refused to see it. The years that followed were full and rich. They expanded the ranch, hired hands who were treated fairly, and paid well. They became leaders in the community, advocates for fair business practices and equal treatment. And when their first daughter was born, a big, healthy baby with Lila's gray eyes and Cole's dark hair, they named her Sarah, after the woman whose careful documentation had brought down an empire and saved a ranch. Midnight lived another 15 years, gentle and loyal to the end, and when he finally passed peacefully in his sleep, they buried him on the hillside overlooking the ranch with full honors. He'd been more than a horse. He'd been the catalyst that brought them together, the first soul to recognize Lila's worth when everyone else saw only her size. Red Hollow transformed in the years after the Hale's downfall. New families moved in, drawn by fair banking practices and honest governance. The town became known throughout Colorado as a place where hard work was rewarded and where everyone, regardless of size, background, or circumstance, was given a fair chance to prove themselves. And at the center of it all stood Iron Ridge Ranch, rebuilt bigger and stronger than before. A testament to the truth that power has nothing to do with size and everything to do with the strength of your character and the courage to stand when others would fall. Lila Harper had walked into a lion's den expecting humiliation and found instead her destiny. She'd been sent as a punchline and become a legend, and she'd proven, once and for all, that the measure of a person isn't in how they look or what others think of them, but in how they respond when tested by fire. Red Hollow had wanted a joke. What they got was a fortress disguised as a woman, and the reminder that sometimes the strongest among us are the ones who've been underestimated their entire lives, waiting for the moment when they can finally show the world what they're truly made of. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the canyon walls in impossible colors, Lila would sometimes catch Cole looking at her with that same expression of wonder he'd worn in the barn that first day, when she'd calmed the uncalmable horse and shown him that miracles still existed in the world. "What are you thinking?" she'd ask, and he'd smile and say that they sent you here to be broken, and instead you saved us all. It was the truth, plain and simple, and in the end, truth always wins.